So I'm going to be talking about the context I've been working in for the last couple of years, an attempt to build student agency and sociocracy into a high school in Michigan. So to dive in a little bit further into that context, Morey Flextech High School, if we take a look at that map, is located in Michigan in the USA. It is in the middle of the state. I have a fun time getting people to show that Michigan is actually on your hand and you can point to where you are. So you can kind of do that with Michigan here, but we're in a rural town called Shepherd. And we are a new public charter high school that was initiated in 2018. To provide a little context on what a charter is that the charter itself is a public school. So we get state funding at our school. We have filled out a charter that follows certain guidelines that we've written out, but we also have to follow some certain state or federal guidelines as well to receive this funding. So a little bit different from private schools or different models, definitely different from Hope School that we just learned about. We're in our second year. And we have about 40 to 50 students, so we are a small campus. We started our first year with just 9th and 10th graders, which to provide ages, we had ranges in age from like 14 to about 17-year-olds. And we expanded to add 2 more grade levels this most recent year. We had anywhere from 12-year-olds to 18-year-olds. So we've got about 40 to 50 students, give or take. We've had rolling admission as well. So we have students coming from other high schools and middle schools in the area. And our charter has been focused on project-based learning, student agency, and authentic experiences for students. So to take a little bit of a deeper dive onto some of those to just provide a little bit of our context, project-based learning, we don't do final tests and like big exams. Our final projects are interactive, sometimes individualized based on the content and the curriculum. We do have classes. Kids are going to classes throughout a day. This is not a democratic free school where they're able to develop and study what they want to. This is a place where you're going to classes with teachers, which is an interesting tension point that we'll get to with sociocracy. Student agency, which we'll see kind of runs hand in hand with sociocracy, and authentic experiences such as guest speakers, field trips, and et cetera, et cetera. So who am I? I was the social studies teacher. I didn't come in and say, like this school, the charter actually had nothing mentioned about sociocracy. What happened in some of the first trainings that I was at after I was hired, I was given, this generalized charter. We're doing project-based learning, we're doing student agency, and authentic experiences. I'm like, cool. But we're trying to figure out this student agency thing. I had recently been to visit other democratic free schools. Specifically, the one that most inspired me was the Brooklyn Free School, which had consensus-based process with students. And so I had a generalized suggestion, just like, well, we're trying to build student agency. What if we do things democratically? And I thought this was a crazy idea, pie in the sky. And my principal and other admins were like, okay, let's try it. And I was like, really? Wow. So we jumped right in. So I've been kind of the initiator coordinator. I have nothing in my job role that really says sociocracy, but I am all in. I've been doing it for a couple of years, and we'll learn about that process throughout our presentation here. So this generalized goal, which I think I really want to walk us through. So here's the spectrum here of student agency. I've mentioned this term student agency. There are 3 terms listed here. We have compliance, we have engagement, and we have empowerment. Most public schools in our model of compulsory education, we're trying to get students just to compliance. Be okay with being here, follow the rules, do that. As a teacher, something that we're pushed to do is we want students to be engaged. So I want engagement in my classroom. I want you to come in and engage with my lesson. What student agency, the goal that I've been trying to push with various democratic initiatives that we landed on with sociocracy, as we'll see, is empowerment. Students actually having ownership, having some essence of ownership, some choice, having an opportunity where they can have not just voice and choice, but even maybe building into power. And so we're at all ends of the spectrum. And I would even, we'll get to student feedback in a little bit. Some students might be like, I'm just at compliance. Some students might be, I'm at empowerment, but it's a spectrum and it might change day by day. Yeah, so that's student agency here. First year, we started, as I said, I was based off of a democratic free school model. So we did not use Sociocracy. We utilized all school community meetings once a week. And at these community meetings, we discussed all sorts of things, school policies, school clubs, various things were brought to the fore, but we had about 40 people in a meeting, and I was usually the facilitator, and 40 people in meetings are unwieldy at times, a little hard to handle. And we did not use rounds, 40 person rounds, that's a 4-hour meeting. I have no idea how long, but it's long. And so in this space, the loudest students tended to be heard. There was avenues where students were starting to feel empowerment, but the quieter students didn't tend to speak up unless they had like a moment of like, I can't stand for this. There was also the power dynamics there where sometimes staff were really able to come in and just kind of stop things, that no vote. So in this consensus process, sometimes if you can have tyranny of the minority, that one thumbs down vote can really just throw a proposal to the wind. So that was a little bit of a challenge, but at the same time, we had this foundation for engaging students around being a part of the school, about having some level of ownership. And we had a flag football club started. There was a compost that was built by students. School dances came from the students and were run by students and support by staff. So there were pluses and there were challenges. So that was our first year. And we rolled from our first year into our second year. And in our second year, we attempted to integrate Sociocracy. If you take a look at that second bullet point there where I say a staff training at the start of the school year on Sociocracy, using the School Circles documentary, which Hope mentioned in the last presentation, amazing documentary. If you haven't seen it, I totally recommend watching it. I watched it and was like, oh my God, this is amazing. I have to bring it to my staff. Let's watch it together. Took bits and pieces. We started breaking down. I was just trying to get more staff buy-in on our democratic process as is. And I had been the person to this point that had been really the motor, the engine, trying to push along what we'd been doing. And I kind of introduced the idea of Sociocracy at this staff training. And I got such a positive response on what had been introduced in School Circles and Sociocracy that we're like, let's try it, let's do it. So we did. And we started using rounds. We started using various circles that I'll be showing our first attempt at circle design. With elected representatives, we used elections, sociocratic elections, and consent-based decision-making. The first couple months of our student circle, which I'll be explaining more in a second, staff modeled roles such as facilitation and notes-taking for the first 2 months. Then students actually started taking on roles. They started facilitating, they started notes taking, and it was really cool so we tried to have this modeling process. Let's take a look at this document here. So here's our first circles. And it was an attempt. If you take a look at the bottom, you'll see advisory circles. So what are advisory circles? Advisories were kind of our homeroom. Grade levels would meet, at the start of every day, you meet with your homeroom. And so each advisory would have an advisory circle and would send representatives to a school circle or student circle. We called it both. And then that student circle would meet once a week and would elect representatives to go meet with admin circle. The arrows can be a little confusing here. Teachers would be sending in support to the student circle to help with, as I said before, facilitation, notes taking, and just generalized support. And also we would try to have a representative from building and maintenance staff as well. This was a work in progress. It had some flaws. Our original goal was to have admin present at the student circle, but something I'll be talking about a little bit later that is a tension point is time. Admin did not have time to actually attend the student circle. So we then tried to adapt in that students were elected to go to the admin circle. And as you can kind of see, it kind of still follows that triangle of hierarchy a little bit. So even though we're trying to build voice and choice, on some level, it did model this flow of like, it was a student council of sorts, if you want to kind of think of it as such. But we were trying to engage it and actually have meetings and supportive processes that could then meet with administration with proposals and ideas. So to provide a little bit more context on how students participated, we have these 3 different circles that I just mentioned. And I'm going to focus on the students for now. I'll talk a little bit more about how teachers and staff were involved. Advisory, you have students meeting with their advisory, their grade level, their age. Once a week, you elect representatives that then go to the student circle. The student circle with support from staff would meet once a week to discuss ideas, discuss proposals. That meeting would be run sociocratically, and they would then elect representatives to go to the admin circle. And then they would meet with the principal and other administrative staff to, if there are any ideas that really needed to make sure that admin had consent on, if it was anything to do with larger school policy, if it had anything to do with a school event, clubs, usage of building space, any modifications of building space, all of that kind of followed that trajectory. So what did the student circle look like? Here's a student circle in action right here. So that's our big cafeteria. And we have the students all sitting in a circle with support from staff. I have much shorter hair in this picture. And, we have the various levels of engagement here. We might just have some compliance, we might have some engagement, and we might have some empowerment, all in that circle. Students, to provide a little bit of context as well, could attend this circle even if they were an elected representative. Elected representatives from advisories were sometimes given voting power. It depended on the advisory, and sometimes weren't. So you have that flow process where students can give on some level, some students did want to give away their power. They're like, these meetings, whatever, teenagers, sometimes they do that. And then there were some students that were elected representatives given voting power, but then there were some students that weren't elected representatives, still wanted to know what was going on. And notes taking at times was great, and sometimes didn't always do the best at explaining what was going on. This is a work in progress, we're still trying to figure out. And so other students would attend this student circle. And that was cool to see, but sometimes would have larger meetings. I forget exactly, if we look at that meeting there, that might be 20 people sitting around. And for a sociocratic meeting, that's sometimes hard to facilitate, especially with rounds. When you're trying to work through a proposal and you're getting opinions from 20 different people, that's just, the quick reactions round turns into something that might be 10, 20 minutes long. So that was a tension point as well. So student circle. Now, what was student feedback? So I'm not going to read through all of these, but if you take a look at the screen, these are all written feedback from various students. That was just really nice to hear on some level. I do want to add the caveat as we're reading some of the student feedback that not all is positive. Some students thought school circle was dumb. They just wanted to have decisions made for them. Why do I need to go to these circles? School circle, just make decisions for me. I don't see any point to this, because I think Hope talked about this a little bit in the last presentation. There's a power differential. There is a power dynamic. And as you saw, the flow, even in our circles as laid out, does flow up. They're still like, well, admin or staff are still just going to make decisions. And it's still something we're working through, but we're still trying to find avenues where students can have voice and choice. We're asking for feedback. We might not be asking for consent from students on everything. And yeah, it's just a work in progress. But at the same time, I've seen growth from students on just social skills, where students are sitting in a meeting together and just like, oh man, Johnny's point of view is really, that really helps my proposal. Or where they're just like, you're asking for my opinion on this? Like, wow, I didn't realize that could happen at a school. We have a lot of kids coming from public schools that are just authoritarian and don't give a crap about what students have to say. It's compliance. All they want is compliance, compliance, compliance. And so we're just trying to, squeak that wheel a little bit to gain a little bit more. And for these students in particular, to be able to hear from more than one point of view. And just to hear some students be like, wow, I can listen to other people. And, sometimes teenagers with the emotions and the life stuff, we can be very self-involved as teenagers. And for some of these teenagers to realize that they're a part of this larger community that they can interact with, that's been really great feedback to see and hear. And so we've used sociocratic tools for the whole school and some aspects of governance, but we also have used it in the classroom. And I'm going to speak to that for this next slide. So I'm a social studies teacher. I teach history. I teach US history. I teach world history. I teach economics. I teach civics. I follow the Michigan curriculum. That's a part of what I do at this school. But I've been trying to bring sociocratic tools to my classroom. I teach 5 classes a day. It's sometimes a lot. And trying to build, that's going back to that spectrum that I talked about before. I don't just, there are some students that are just complying or sometimes not complying, they just want to resist, they want to rebel. Pushing for that engagement and maybe that empowerment. So the 3 things that I've been integrating, as said on the slide, rounds, elections, and consent decision-making. Where in a classroom discussion, I try to push it out of, instead of, the people who are the loudest get heard the most, actually just pushing for a round. It does put students on the spot sometimes, which I have to work on to build on that comfort level where students actually feel comfortable with it. But I want to be able to hear from people one at a time. Wait your turn, okay? It's not just, the eager person speaking up all the time. And also elections, where I talked about how we're doing project-based learning. I'm not exactly sure. I have an idea of what this project could look like, but the avenue of how we get there could be a variety of different ways. So sometimes I'll present 2 or 3 different options to students, and we'll have an election where students are able to offer questions, offer opinions, and then as facilitator in that process, I offer a proposal that then, as I said before, students get to, or not said before, it says below, students get to consent to what lesson we do next. And it helps build engagement by students actually giving consent to what lesson we do next. That actually has them do a little bit more. Now, I can't always guarantee that they're going to love the lesson. They're just like, oh man, why did I give consent to this lesson? This lesson sucks, Mr. Gowen. That happens sometimes, I'm not going to lie. What do we have, that's a whole nother realm of like figuring out teaching and supporting them in those moments. But I was like, hey, you gave consent to this, give it a shot, take a moment. So it's been really cool to use just some of those tools. And I don't use it every class period. I don't use it in every class necessarily, but I try to find those moments where I can just open up the door a little bit to building a empowered classroom. And it's not necessary, it's tough because I also have to follow curriculum. There is a state handed down, which is its own political ball game, especially in the history world, where I'm just like, well, you got to get this to get credit to get this high school degree. That's still the system we're working within. This is where we're going, but I can help you get there in ways that, we dance. Maybe we go here, then here, then here, then here, to try to individualize it or make it better for the community as is. So that's what I've been doing in the classroom. So I've talked about some of the student feedback, which fed into some of the successes, but in the next slide, we're going to be talking about some of the successes here. So most, if not all, students tend to think that they have a voice in some choice at our school, which has been really cool. I have students that don't go to student circle, barely participate in their advisory circle, and I kind of talk to them about that. So like, what do you think? What do you think about this thing? Well, they're like, it's cool that it's going on. If something's, if I check the agenda and they're talking about something I'll care about, I'll show up. But most of the time I don't care. Like, I don't, I'm okay with other people making that decision for me. So it's interesting to see that it's just like they are still being perceptive of that, even if they're not participating directly. And then there are students who try to go to every meeting that they can. They just want to be involved. So there are both. Students have shown aptitude quickly on rounds and the consent process. That's been mind-blowing for me, sometimes better than adults, where I've seen students, you understand rounds and consent process because they're not as necessarily embedded in these structures that we have, these hierarchies. And sometimes rounds is just like, okay, I just wait my turn. Oh, I give consent, okay. This is within my range of tolerance, and that's not all students. There are some students who have a hard time deciding to something that they don't agree with. That's like range of tolerance is a training that we're working on building into our next year. Because sometimes it's like, well, I don't agree. Well, it's like, well, let's revisit. And that's a training issue. And I'll talk about that in a little bit. Rounds have allowed for quieter students to speak up. That's really cool to see, where they actually realize, oh, that student that talks a lot in class, in rounds right now, he's not going to interrupt me or she's not going to interrupt me. I can wait and know that I'm going to be listened to. And that has allowed for some of these quieter voices to speak up. And I've really appreciated that, which gets to just like socio-emotional and communication skills for some of these students as well, which is just really cool to see. There's many student-started initiatives. We've got, students selling popcorn. There's a garden club. We have school dances, flag football club, as I said. There's a virtual party that's going to be happening next week where a student was like, I haven't seen any of my friends. I want to organize a party. And so he is, and with help from staff, and that's been really cool to see. There hasn't been as much participation in school circles during coronavirus quarantine, but students are, there's a little bit of engagement, but at school, a lot of initiatives have been started. We've even had positive responsive shifts to school policy. We started this most recent school year with 3-minute passing time, and we have 6-7 classes a day. We're there from 8 a.m. to 4 p.m. 3-minute passing time. I mean, it's a lot, even for us as teachers. And so we actually brought this through that whole process that we talked about, from advisory circle, school circle to admin circle. And there was a responsive policy shift where we shifted that passing time policy to 5 minutes, and actually were responsive to, like, students were like, I don't have enough time to think, or I need to see my girlfriend in the hallway, or whatever, whatever reason there may be. There was a positive responsive shift where students realize they can have a voice on certain issues. They might not always necessarily get to a place where we can build new policy, but sometimes even just hearing that feedback allows for staff and admin to build a more responsive and inclusive environment. We've integrated rounds into our staff meetings, which has definitely shifted culture, which has been great, even just in staff meetings. Just the opportunity to integrate rounds. And there's been a lot of positive feedback from staff, and we've initiated a teacher support circle, because another caveat in the charter school land in the US is we aren't unionized teachers. And so there's not really any avenues where we can kind of meet and gather together as a group. So we have a teacher support circle. We meet once a week, and it's not necessarily like we even have like, we still have staff meeting that we all go to as well, but in a teacher support circle, it's like this collective emotional support. If there's anything that we're working through, or we need support designing a project, just an opportunity for us to kind of shoot ideas off each other, or just like, give each other a hug, whatever's needed. And that's pretty nice. All right, so those are some of the successes. Now on to some of the challenges. All right, we're integrating hierarchy. We're not integrating hierarchy. The hierarchy is already there. We're integrating sociocracy within a larger hierarchical organization. We are a charter that exists with, there's 2 other Flextechs. We exist within a larger CS Partners. That's the Michigan charter authorizer, and then Michigan, public schools. So like, we are the one organization that's attempting to integrate sociocracy. None of those others are sociocratic. So there are tension points that come with that. And it's kind of like bottom up this. And so there are times at which the process is bypassed, either because we need to follow the state or the other Flextechs in doing this. And sometimes there are just points where it's like the process isn't always followed. That's not necessarily a terrible thing, but it's also like just a point of tension. As like, maybe we try to, as Hope said, let's bring sociocracy to all the schools. Woo, let's do it. But a lot of these districts, these larger school organizations are hierarchical already. And so what are these points and like levers that we have to build things that are more democratic, more inclusive? And we're slowly there, but it's also at times not always there. As I said, we're a public school. We have a structured schedule of classes and curriculum. I'm not designing classes with students. That would be really cool if we could get there. That's kind of but as I said, if you remember back to the earlier slide, there's 8 staff. There are 5 teachers right now, and I'm the only history teacher at my school. So I have to teach all the history classes. I don't really have necessarily other time to develop, super cool electives, although I have had cool electives. I'm not gonna like throw shade at those electives. I've had some fun stuff as well. I don't know if there might be a picture in our last slide. I had a rock and roll history kind of course where they did a mural at the end, and we have some room for electives. I did one on food and gardening. But I also have to teach what Michigan sets out: US history, world history, civics, econ. There's just no room to budge on that. And students have to take all those classes too if they want the Michigan degree, that like credit. We're not a private school. So there's that doesn't necessarily give them as much freedom. And we're trying to figure that out. That's just kind of a work in progress for us as well. Training for both students and staff. We don't necessarily have as much time. We're also trying to get trained on project-based learning as teachers and having students understand that training is huge in sociocracy, as I'm sure some of you are aware. And so having an opportunity for training for both students and staff is really important, because I think it's like a Jerry quote that says that sociocracy doesn't need good leaders, it needs good followers. And so just having time to really have students buy in. And I became a little bit over relied on as like implementation. I was the energy, I'm like, woo, let's go sociocracy. And if I'm relied on for facilitation and all of these things, it became a burden. And so, and recently we've been starting to push that out a little bit more, but it has been hard because not everyone necessarily, it does require a download that takes time, which is perfect transition. Time. We don't necessarily always have enough time to integrate sociocracy. You got to go to 6 classes a day. You got to do your homework and go to sleep and show up back at school. Luckily, we have time once a week to have our student circle and have our advisory circle. But staff, students, admin, we all don't necessarily have enough time. I think this is a tension point in general as sociocracy tries to move into and infiltrate, so to speak, more bigger districts and spaces. With the structure that is already there, there isn't much time for students and staff to have other spaces. So we're trying the best we can, given the circumstances. Feedback loops. I really liked Hope's sticky note idea of like keeping things once, like for a whole week, and we try it out, and then students need a lot of support when a proposal is passed, I've noticed, or they're just used to having the adult support and getting it there. We haven't been great with, sometimes it's just like, yeah, students are empowered, they're gonna go do it, great proposal, and then it dies within a week. You know, like what happened to the popcorn idea? Well, they didn't know what to do. There wasn't a proper feedback loop in place. They needed support. They maybe needed to have like an action group meet twice a week to plan out when they were gonna sell the popcorn, what kind of popcorn, all of these things that may be a bit more action oriented. So it's a whole nother realm of training and supporting students to become empowered. It's not just like students become empowered, they're there, life is great. It takes time, it takes effort, and it takes support. And so figuring out how to build better feedback loops has been a challenge. And some students just don't care. We are a part of school. Some students don't like school, and therefore sociocracy and what we've been doing sucks as well, because it's just a part of school. And there's going to be that resistance. And sometimes, as I said before, there are students who don't participate and they're like, wow, it's cool that we have that option, but doesn't always come through. There are still students that are like, whatever. There's still the power differential. I think some of those students may actually be super perceptive of power, and sometimes actually are like, it's just they're noticing that there is power and they don't have enough of it or something like that. So I think that there's probably more there. And then to add on to that, there's teenage drama. Sometimes the conflict at the meeting is because someone else, maybe they broke up with each other. Maybe there's something that was said in the hallway. Teenage emotions are strong, they're real. I really appreciated how Hope mentioned in our last presentation about integrating nonviolent communication. That could be something to explore because sometimes emotions are very real and they cause the meetings to go in directions that we didn't necessarily want them to go. So yeah. And it's a constant work in progress. This is just, we're constantly working. It's just growing, and it's just, sometimes it's hard for students. It's like, why don't you have this figured out? Why isn't this sociocracy thing just ready? Why do we need to change it and grow? And it's also interesting as a little caveat of presenting this to students, and we're a charter school that are trying to gain more students. So there's this marketable aspect where we're a work in progress, and sometimes it's like about having things like ready to go. it's not completely ready to go. It's a work in progress. That's a part of it. So what are opportunities for growth? I'll try to go through these a little bit quicker because I think I'm getting close to 30 minutes. So the quarantine has allowed for more integration of sociocracy within an organizational structure. We meet, I've actually been meeting consistently with the principal at my school, and we're just trying to figure out like more clarity around circles, domains, aims, just like what is the structure of our school and how does sociocracy fit that? Which has been awesome. Without this time, we really probably wouldn't have been able to integrate sociocracy a bit more. So just like a caveat to the madness of the current situation we're in. And we've had sociocracy training for all staff. We're using the empowered learning circles model of SOFA, and that's been awesome. We've got our next session tomorrow, which is great. And we're building towards an actual school circle. You may have noticed at our first, and I say first because I'm going to show you a draft of our potential circle structure next year. We're building towards an actual school circle. We had a student circle. We want to build an actual school circle that has all stakeholders there. We haven't had that yet. Where we have students, staff, parents, board, everyone on the same table. It's going to be interesting figuring out, especially with parents, like what is the domain of this space? What can we like, how much are we going to parents for things? I'm not like, there is, and figuring out some of those tension points will be a work in progress, but just a space where students especially can see they're at a table with adults and their voices matter. I think that that will be huge. So we're working towards that. I'm going to be designing an elective class next year on sociocracy. That, you know, as I said, I sometimes teach cool electives. I might be the history teacher, but I have cool electives sometimes. Although the students who don't care are probably like, whatever, Mr. Gowen, that's not a cool elective. I'll let them say that, and still we'll move forward to teach sociocracy as elective. I think especially to think about training on facilitation. As we've had students step up into facilitation roles, I think just acknowledging that facilitation is a skill. And that level of students can't just jump to empowerment from compliance, like engagement, like there are skills, and providing them just more training and also just having them on board with the implementation process. So I'm going to have this elective next year. We'll see how it goes. Yeah, it'll just be a deeper dive, and I'm excited about that. We're going to be building an orientation. We haven't had that. As I said, sociocracy was not a part of our charter. So we're just trying to build in higher, like training is a challenge. So we're trying to build in better training avenues. So an orientation for the whole school community. We're probably going to watch parts of school circles, although one caveat is we're probably going to be cutting out the piece about like the free school model, because I don't really want to tell parents that the students can do whatever they want at the school, because that's just not what our school is. And that's, we've had our own problems with that, which is a whole nother story of just, yeah, we're figuring it out and just figuring out what student agency is. So we're building just an orientation for what sociocracy is for the school community. This is including staff, students, parents, board, just something that they can all take part in. There is also going to be potential in the future. This is not a potential, I don't think this is a next year thing, but it's in the like talk around a restorative justice circle. I think Hope mentioned the idea of how, actually not the idea, the practice of how if there's a disciplinary issue or some sort of conflict, restorative justice, using restorative practices. We're talking about eventually having elected students and staff to build an inclusive process around discipline issues, because in all honesty right now, we are a school that still uses suspension if there are higher level discipline issues, and there's detention as well. That's just where we're at right now as a school. We're working towards these restorative practices, but we're not there yet. So maybe we can do that sociocratically. And another thing too is that the other Flextechs I may be offering sociocracy trainings to, which is exciting. Can I bring this to other schools? And I'm also going to give a shout out to the SOFA Schools and Education Circle that Hope and I are both a part of. So if you're interested, please join us. It's a fun time. We talk about schools and education and sociocracy, and therefore it's great, of course. All right, so here's our next year attempt right now. It's a draft. This is our potential school circles structure for next year. The arrows are a little overwhelming to me as I look at it, so I apologize if it's just like crazy on the eyes right now. But as you can see, the advisory is feeding into a student circle that then goes to a school circle, and actually having parents, board, staff, and students there. The club circle is to kind of maybe catch some of the student-started initiatives and providing representatives, because we also have a cross-country team, we have an esports team, we have these things that also have adults that are supporting them as well, and just figuring out ways to, I don't know, catch that as in our organizational structure as well. So we're attempting that. We also have some stakeholder organizations that are helping us with other things. And as I said, those are not sociocratic, those are hierarchical. And so that's where we're at. That's our attempt next year. And that's it for me.